And we are live. Alhamdulillah. Wassalat wassalam. Here we are. I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this live broadcast, thanks to your generosity and recording, is to get in day 274 of the project, as we are making our way via poetry and prose through Western civilization using H.G. Wells's text, The Outline of History. The full project here at the college for our enrolled students, our alumni, our supporters, and you in the general public is available at our website. You can see that down below. You can get your hands, or your eyeballs at least, and your mouse on the text of the outline of history. I also last week recorded an extensive breakdown of what is this academic work, this unified curricula. So I'll point your attention there if you want more as to the whole project in toto. Without further ado, let us cue up our music at a proper volume, and we will go from there. We're looking at Socialism's Dawn and the Youth of Napoleon Bonaparte. So I will orient ourselves shortly. Let's get an audio check here. There we go. I can live with that, and so can you. All right. Now I have my hot water going. I've learned these few weeks to always have water nearby. So you will excuse me. I'm going to change the screen share momentarily, and I'll get my water, and we'll be on with the show. Okay, grand, grand. Okay, so part of the project, as we know, is poetry. Poetry is really the soul on a page, like any piece of art is, isn't it? And so we will synchronize our poetic focus. Oftentimes, in fact, especially for um, this project aspect online, we often will use folk music. And so, appropriately, this is the Bonnie Light Horseman, or sometimes known as Broken Hearted I'll Wander. And we'll just read it as poetry. You can find all sorts of grand recordings online. It was about a wistful woman waiting for her cavalry lover to come back. But will he? When Boney commanded his army to stand, he leveled his cannons right over the land. He leveled his cannons his victory to gain, and slew my light horsemen on the way coming home. And given accents, you can imagine that was pronounced haim, gain, haim. Broken hearted I'll wander, broken hearted I'll remain, since my bonny light horseman in the wars he was slain. And if I was a small bird and had wings to fly, I would fly o'er the salt sea to where my love does lie. And with my fond wings I'd beat o'er his grave, and I'd kiss the pale lips that lie cold in the clay. Broken hearted I'll wander, broken hearted I'll remain, since my bonny light horseman in the wars he was slain. Now the dove she laments for her mate as she flies. Oh, where, tell me, where is my true love, she cries, and where in this wild world is there one to compare with my bonny light horseman who was slain in the ware? Broken hearted I'll wander, broken hearted I'll remain, since my bonny light horseman in the wars he was slain. When Boney commanded his army to stand, he leveled his cannons right o'er the land. He leveled his cannons his victory to gain, and slew my light horseman on the way coming hame. Broken hearted I'll wander, broken hearted I'll remain, since my bonny light horseman in the wars he was slain. Tuatum Domine miserere nobis. Thus is the bonny light horseman. There is another one where the woman believes her lover has died, and he in fact hasn't. He's just pretending that he's kind of hiding with his unit, or hiding amongst his unit, and then there's a big surprise at the end when he shows up. So anyway, all sorts of folk music that comes from the Napoleonic Wars. Strangely enough, a lot in the English language, the English being, of course, fierce opponents, the greatest opponents of Napoleon, at least in terms of determination and cant and perfidy. And what's also interesting is not just the volume of English language folk songs from the Napoleonic period, but also the rather favorable impression they have of the corporal, le petit caporal, the little corporal. By the way, just concerning our college here, we do have coming up later this month of June the Hidden Causes of Autism seminar by Janice Barcello. And here's a photograph of Janice, so you can find out about herself with a little write-up and all her books. And the Hidden Causes program itself, what the medical establishment will never tell you, and what we can do to end this epidemic. Very valuable, and Janice has her own angle on this, her proper angle. So very good there. And moving along, we will switch the camera and hear from no other than H.G. Wells himself. We'll hear from the outline of history. So we've finished the French Revolution proper, let's say, and before we dive into the Napoleonic period, we will take a look at these economical changes. We've talked about the rise of the physiocrats and the rise of capitalism. So Wells' kind of idols are for a moment, and we have this focus, and well, we should, because of the huge topic of labor in the 19th century. Now, whether or not the Napoleonic period should be completely severed from the French Revolution, often in historiography it is classed as a different epoch, although we do want to see an obvious connection there. Had there been no French Revolution, surely Napoleon would not have risen to the heights that he did because of the nature of the wars and the nature of my audio should get good now. Okay, there we go, much better. When you're trying to juggle and chew gum and all this all at once, sometimes you turn I wanted the camera switched to the stream camera. For some reason, my stream camera, which is the camera that you're seeing here, has, an audio feature. It's not a very good audio feature, and sometimes I accidentally turn on that, when I mean to turn on the camera itself. So we're looking at this section here, Socialism's Dawn, and it is an interesting turning point, especially given the focus, as I say, of labor in the 19th century. And then we'll hop into the youth of Napoleon Bonaparte. So we'll have an appropriate pointer, an appropriate old-fashioned pointer. The ebb of this tide of revolution in the world, this is the pulling out, right? We talked last week about the Thermidorian reaction. This is the conservative reaction to the Jacobins, and it remains for the Directory, as it's called, to mop up a lot of the problems that were caused by the Jacobins who had declared war effectively on the rest of the world. The Jacobin period isn't too far removed, if you want to put it in a contemporary context, as if ISIS were to take over France. You might remember ISIS burning its passports and, F the world, and we declare war on the world with their curvy swords and their big CIA beards. Well, that's kind of, well, mine is the CIA. That's kind of what the Jacobins do. They kind of burn all their bridges. And that's part of the, I suppose, the mythology of the Jacobins. Along with the guillotine and so forth. But this causes all sorts of problems, not the least of which is having to fight all of these wars, which they cause. So there you get the conservatives. So the revolution ebbs out. So the Directory are certainly revolutionary, but the conservative revolutionaries, this tide, which had created the Great Republic of America, that's a typo, by the way, and threatened to submerge all European monarchies, was now at hand. It is as if something had thrust up from beneath the surface of human affairs and made a gigantic effort for a time spent itself, right? What is he's talking about? The energy of revolution. If you want this even more poetically placed, I would encourage you to read an excellent book by Victor Hugo called 1793, or perhaps just 93. As I've said a few weeks ago, I think it's a much tighter book than Les Miserables, though it hits on a lot of similar themes. But at one point in 93, Hugo speaks about, he has a scene where it's Robespierre, Danton, and Marat drinking in a coffee house, and he describes them as three storm clouds hurling lightning bolts at each other. And we do have to ask ourselves, in almost a spiritual way, what is this energy of revolution? It swept many obsolescent and evil things away, but many evil and unjust things remained after the French Revolution. It solved many problems, and it left the desire for fellowship and order face to face with much vaster problems that it seemed only to have revealed. Privilege of certain types had gone, right? The nobility was outlawed, for example. Privilege of certain types had gone. Many tyrannies had gone. Much religious persecution had gone. Much, it's worth remembering, was also created by the French Revolution, most outstandingly in the Vendée in the west, and in Brittany, where you had that very pesky counter-revolutionary chapter of the French Revolution, leading to the first modern genocide. So yes, much religious persecution had ended with the deposing of the Catholic Church, but more also was started with the National Assembly. When these things of the Ancien Regime had vanished, it seems as if they never mattered. What did matter was that for all their votes and enfranchisement, and in spite of all their passion and effort, the common men were still not free and not enjoying an equal happiness. We must put this time period in the context of economical changes that are happening. This is the rise, this is the very heart, the very stride of the first industrial revolution. And that's why we had a section given over especially to the industrial revolution in England before we began this section on the French Revolution. These must never be taken as separate spheres. That the immense promise and air of a new world with which the revolution had come remained unfulfilled. The revolution had not made good on its promises. The world hadn't come to know the promises of the revolution, liberté, égalité, fraternité, but those promises were not met. What does Martin Luther King say? That the promissory note bounced at the bank. He has that in one of his speeches. Yet, after all, this wave of revolution had realized nearly everything that had been clearly thought out before it came. So it wasn't all a failure in terms of its own agenda. Again, I don't care what you or I think about the French Revolution. In terms of its own agenda, a lot of it failed and fizzled, but a lot was brought to fulfillment. It was not now failing for want of impetus, but for want of finished ideas. The energy had began, but it did not have the energy to finish, to complete these ideas. Many things that had oppressed mankind were swept away forever. Now that they were swept away, become apparent how unprepared men were for the creative opportunities this clearance gave them. And periods of revolution are periods of action. And yet we began, look here, we began, he says, now the revolution is ebbing, right? Ebbing is when the water recedes, right? Periods of revolution are periods of action. But now we've come to a time in the French Revolution, during the Directory, almost on the cusp of Napoleon Bonaparte, where there is no more energy. And we see that in revolutions. We see that in revolutions, and not just political revolutions, military ones, religious revolutions as well. Sometimes they just lose their verve. They just lose their, what got them going. It's almost as if it's like children. They kind of move on to something else. And wrestling here with camera. There we go. If you only knew what it looks like off of the camera. Okay. And in them, men reap harvests of ideas that have grown during phases of interlude. Look at this. Wow. Okay. That's right. I have to angle I know what I have to do. Okay. And they leave the fields cleared for new seasons of growth, but they cannot suddenly produce ripe and new ideas to meet an unanticipated riddle. I'll just read one more section here. I think you get what he's playing around with, this idea that the revolution had brought about much, but there was still, in certain regards, certain ideas that had not come to their fulfillment, stemming from liberté, égalité, fraternité. And well, maybe in a certain way, work that remains for another generation. Maybe it's just a day's work for one generation to topple the nobility and the church and the ancien regime. Maybe it remains for another generation to harvest ideas from the initial revolution. The sweeping away of king and lord, of priest and inquisitor, of landlord and tax gatherer and taskmaster, left the Massamenta face to face for the first time with a certain very fundamental funda. You know, funda means bottom or foundation. Fundamental. If you're a fundamentalist in something, it means you cling to the foundational aspects of it. A very fundamental aspect of the social structure, relationships they had taken for granted and had never realized the need of thinking hard and continuously about before, institutions that had seemed to be in the nature of things, and matters that had seemed to happen by the same sort of necessity of thought round the dawn and springtime, were discovered to be artificial, controllable, and they were not so perplexingly intricate, right? So this order, the ancien regime, the old regime of Louis XVI, Louis XV, Louis XIV, absolute monarchy and all that went with that, that for most men, like it is for us in our own way, in our own cultural aspects, that is something most people don't consider to question. It's just the order of things. It's just the way the world is. Well, when revolutions happen, then you are faced with having to have these questions of why do these social institutions exist? How ought they look? They were discovered to be artificial, controllable, and men had not thought them before so perplexingly intricate. And now the old routines were abolished and done away with in urgent need of control. The new order found itself confronted with three riddles which it was quite unprepared to solve. The new revolutionary order: property, currency, and international relations. Let us take these three problems in order and ask what they are and how they arose in human affairs. When was the last time H.G. Wells did this? He did this during the American Revolution. He laid out three causes. So now we're moving from just the narrative of events to a certain analysis. We're moving, for a few paragraphs, from history to historiography. Every human life is deeply entangled in them. What? Property, currency, relationships, and concern in their solution. The rest of this human history becomes more and more clearly the development of the effort to solve these problems. That is to say, to interpret property, so to establish currency, and so to control international relations as to render possible a worldwide progressive. We're getting that now. Now we're getting that HUL's Fabian socialist spirit coming through here. We're a progressive, happy community of will. I don't know what it is about these dudes that write these meta histories, but they all get starry-eyed when they start thinking of a world order or world government. Anyway, we still love H.G. Wells. Anyway, okay. They are the three riddles of the Sphinx of Fate, to which human commonweal, what is a great old word, commonweal, must find the answer or perish. All right, tu autem domine misere de nobis Deum gratias. Okay, so that primes us in this section. Of course, you're reading along with this outside of class, so we don't need to read every word here. But he lays on these points. I think it's probably worthwhile just to look at the last part of this, and that's international relations, and indeed relations between citizens, right? This is all, he mentions this all begins in the personal, and so it does. And so just as economy matters to an individual and to a state, and so does currency, likewise, the relations of an individual and of local individuals mirrors itself in the large abstract aggregate. In the third direction in which the revolution had been unprepared with clear ideas was the problem of international relationships. Developments were to occur that interacted disastrously with this state of financial and economic adventure, this scramble and confusion, this preoccupation of men's minds with perplexing slipperiness of their private property and their monetary possession and position at home. The Republic at its birth found itself at war. Had some of those Austrian coalitions had their way, the Republic would have died in its cradle. For a time, that war was waged by new levies with a patriotism and zeal unparalleled in world history. We cannot overemphasize the Battle of Valmy in regards to this, where a levy army, a levée en masse army, defeats the best mercenary army in Europe. This levy welcomes in a sea change, the use of levies and conscription, which we see maybe now after World War I, World War II, in America, Vietnam. We see conscription as an onerous thing, maybe even a manipulation, a cynical manipulation of government. You must put yourself, when you study history in the time period, the levée en masse, and particularly the circumstances around the Battle of Valmy, were such that it was not seen as an onerous thing. It was seen by the revolutionaries who so participated as an example of patriotism and zeal, where people were scrambling to die for the revolution. Right? Keep in mind, modern appraisals of things like conscription, they were not always so, and we have to put ourselves as good historians in the mindset of the past. But that could not go on, right? The energy and the innovation could not go on. The Directory, the conservative reaction to the revolution, found itself at the head of a conquering country, intolerably needy and embarrassed at home, and in occupation of rich foreign lands. It's going to remain for Napoleon tomorrow to, in fact, be part of that mopping up of the chaos that was caused by the Jacobins. Or Napoleon, what's he doing in Spain? What's he doing in Italy? Well, he's solving the problems. He's fixing the problems the Jacobins caused. We have all double natures, and the French in particular seem to be developed logically and symmetrically on both sides. Into these conquered regions, France came as liberator, the teacher of republicanism to mankind. Holland and Belgium become the Batavian Republic. Genoa and its Riviera, the Ligurian Republic. North Italy, the Cisalpine Republic. Switzerland was rechristened the Helvetic Republic. Mulhausen, Rome, and Naples were designated republics. This also shows you the reach of the revolutionary armies. Grouped about France, these republics were to be a constellation of freedom leading the world. Right? If you're a revolutionary, that's how you see all of this reorganization, a constellation of freedom. And remember, that is inherent in the liberal evangel, that it must spread. It must spread, right? So you literally hold territory, establish a republic, free an area from the kings, hold your election. That gives the revolutionaries validity, and then you spread that to the next land, and we see exactly this happening. So America implements these revolutionary principles. That germinates in France 10 years later. France will germinate revolutions in Haiti and Ireland. Napoleon will lead an army around Europe, as we'll find out this week, bringing those revolutionary ideas. around, and those things in 1848, a generation or two later, will explode in that year of revolutions, and that continues to the First World War. The Second World War continues now with these neocon adventures in Afghanistan, Ukraine, Syria. Ukraine is, I guess, worth mentioning twice for neocon adventures. Iraq is what I wanted. This is all a single story. Whether it's the revolution hopping from America to France, or NATO trying to do its mischief in Ukraine, or America in Iraq, whatever, it is part of a single story of liberalism, and part of that is this idea of creating a constellation of what they would call freedom. Freedom, this is indeed worth bringing up, of course, means just commercial rights to freely trade. So everything, whenever you hear all these capital L liberals talking about freedom and all this stuff, they mean free trade. Everything is rendered in commerce. And that's very much a part of the American and French revolutions, and these other aspects as well, is a repudiation of the previous mercantile economical order, and this idea of free trade is very much bound up in these discussions. We often forget that, but it was not forgotten at the time of these events. At the same time, the French government and French private individuals, in concert with the government, proceeded to a complete and exhaustive exploitation of the resources of these liberated lands. And why not? We'll finish up here and then get to Napoleon's youth. Not his time in the army. I mean, literally his youth, his childhood. Anyhow, within 10 years of the meeting of the Estates General of New France, begins to take on a singular likeness of the old. This means the new revolutionary France, not Canada. It is more flushed, more vigorous. It wears the cap of liberty instead of a crown. It has a new army, but a damaged fleet. It has new rich people instead of old rich people. A new peasantry working even harder than the old peasantry and yielding more taxes. Of course, that's one of the ironies of all these liberal revolutions, that people are paying way more in taxes after they've been liberated from the old king and his tax agents. Right? Turns out, as I joke every 4th of July, and Gallo's joking because there's a great deal of truth to this, turns out that taxation with representation is far more tyrannical than taxation without representation. And the proof is in the pudding. People who have a say, so-called, in the amount that they're taxed, strangely enough, end up paying, exponentially more in taxes. It's almost like that was just a slogan to get people paying more money to strangers. I'm going to make a note about New France in just a second, meaning Canada in this instance. This is all referring to France. Let me just finish up. A new foreign policy, curiously like the old foreign policy, disrobed, and there is no millennium. Okay. So a little nod to the secularism of the age. But just one little trivial note here. So in eastern Canada, it's a province called Quebec. And he's having some fun with this term. So when I say New France now, I'm referring to Canada. Interesting thing is that the French in Quebec is actually more organic than the French which is spoken in France itself. And that has to do with the fact that Quebec came under British domination. And so the French language in Quebec never became regulated in the manner that the French language became regulated in France and the new colonies by the Académie Française. So unlike in America, the French language is regulated by the government and has been since the days of Louis the 14th, 15th, 16th, and the Revolution continued that. There is actually an office of the state which chooses words and grammatical usage. Americans are recoiling at this concept. We did try that, actually. Teddy Roosevelt tried to regulate spelling by way of Congress, but it never got off the ground for English speakers. Um, and it did for French speakers, and maybe we have something of the French mindset there to meditate on. But because Quebec was a province of England after the French and Indian War, its French is actually an organic French, which the rest of the language has lost. And in fact, I'm told by people from Canada, it's actually a purer French in the sense that it's a lot closer to, um, to how the language would have been spoken in the 16th century, um, before the academy came along and began manipulating things. So a little bit of trivia there. All right, let's just briefly nibble away at Napoleon's childhood. Always a focus of biographers, the childhood of famous men. And we can live with this, huh? Trick is when you upsize these things not to lose the text. So just double check. And we're good. Okay, so Napoleon Bonaparte was and still is one of France's most revered heroes. Though born a Corsican, and we'll look at the maps tomorrow so that you know where that is. That's one of those islands off of Italy and France. In 1769, Napoleon journeyed to France for schooling at the age of 9. He remained fiercely patriotic towards his homeland throughout his life. Though he visited Corsica infrequently after leaving. I don't know why I turned Corsica into Chappaqua there. I'm thinking of the Metro North, I guess. He often tried to help the island, but was persecuted for his efforts. Napoleon never returned to Corsica willingly, though once he was forced to land on the island in a gale. After an interesting and quiet childhood, Napoleon joined the French artillery at the age of 16. So make a note of that he's an artilleryman. That will have a preference, that will have a play, that will have a pressure on how you look at things. If you're in the artillery, you're maybe more abstract in the artillery. You need to know a lot more mathematics in the artillery. How does this affect your thinking about the quotidian of the day? How does it affect your thinking about politics? Through hard work, bravery, political connections, and being born in a turbulent age, we cannot underestimate this. Napoleon rose to the rank of general. In 1799, Bonaparte was elected first consul of France and her dependencies for life and began his astonishing political career. Later, he proclaimed himself France's emperor. A part of being born in the turbulent age of the French Revolution is also that the French army is being constantly hollowed out of non-coms and officers. And so that allows someone of Napoleon's age to rise through the ranks much faster than would have been the case had the monarchical French army remained in place, had the traditional channels of promotion held him up. But because men were constantly dying, Napoleon was able to meteorically rise, as we used to say. Napoleon reformed much of European law and spread the idea of republicanism throughout much of Europe. His ideas continue to be incorporated into Switzerland's law, the Helvetic Republic. Napoleon also reformed schools and strengthened Paris's reputation as one of the cultural capitals of the world. Napoleon's life was not without setbacks. In 1814, the Allied armies of Britain, Spain, Portugal, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, that's called a bad day when you have all those guys against you, captured many French possessions and some of France herself. Napoleon was forced into exile on the island of Elba, and Louis XVIII was restored to power. This is all just a summary of where we're going this week. Napoleon returned the following year, famously to a beach near Marseille. From this small area, he advanced towards Paris. Throngs of his soldiers, the old guard, following behind him. This is the 100 Days, of course. Louis the 18th fled like a rabbit, and Napoleon resumed his post as emperor. Over the next 136 days, Napoleon advanced into Belgium with more than 100,000 troops. There were combined there the armies of Prussia, Britain, Belgium, who won a narrow victory at Waterloo, Wagrave, Ligny, and Quatre Bras. These battles caused the demise of Napoleon's military and political careers, as well as his second exile, much more stern, even cruel, to St. Helena. Napoleon lived in confinement at Longwood on the island of St. Helena, surrounded by British guards, maybe British assassins. He lived with two trusted generals, far from his wife, Marie Louise. He died on May 5th, 1821, thinking of his former wife, Josephine de Brauharna. I'll have to figure out the pronunciation of famous Josephine's last name. Okay, so we'll get into the nitty-gritty tomorrow. So this is just a summary of where we're going with Napoleon Bonaparte. All right, so I'm up on an appointment here. So I thank you for dropping in for class. Great to see we have some stable students here. Feel free to ask questions in the chat going forward. In any case, you can find out all about the project down below in the description. And for the remainder of the week's work ahead, we're going to look at Napoleon Bonaparte. Finally, do consider attending Janice Barcello's Autism Ultrasound Seminar later this month, in the 26th of June. With all of that being said, I wish you a good day. Please consider enrolling in ApocatastasisInstitute throughout the day, and I'll shut up now. Goodbye.